Former President Donald Trump and former Vice President Mike Pence held rallies in Arizona on Friday to support different GOP candidates for the state's gubernatorial primary in 9 days. Mr. Trump is supporting Kari Lake, a former local news anchor who continues to spread the lie that the 2020 election was stolen. Mr. Pence, meanwhile, is supporting Karen Taylor Robson, calling her the, quote, clear conservative choice. The former VP has not made any mention of the 2020 election in either of his Arizona campaign stops. For more on this, CBS News political director Finn Gomez joins me now. Hi, Finn. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Nancy.
So, Finn, the former vice president was supposed to give a speech at the Heritage Foundation here in D.C. tonight, but bad weather diverted his aircraft and postponed things. What do we know about what he does plan to say to this conservative think tank when he does make the speech?
Yeah, Nancy, sources close to Pence tell me that Pence was going to lay out a domestic policy agenda that was going to focus on the future of the party instead of, quote, being consumed by yesterday's grievances, which seems to be a reference to his former boss and former president, Donald Trump, who was giving his own domestic policy speech focused on crime and other issues tomorrow at the America First Policy Summit here in D.C., which will be the first time he's back in D.C. since he left office. Though Pence's speech today was canceled, he's giving another one tomorrow at the Young America's Foundation conference in D.C. as well. But he's looking more to separate and differentiate himself from his former boss on policy and on other issues like candidates in Arizona.
You know, there's a good reason why he wants to put the past behind him. It's because his security has been at the center of a good deal of the January 6th hearings, and obviously there is a large segment of the Republican base that still supports President Trump, still angry at the fact that he did not go along with plans to stop the lawful counting of the 2020 presidential electors. So how does he get past that? What is his constituency at this point as he looks to mount a bid for 2024?
Nancy, you're absolutely right. If you look at Pence and you look at that 30% obstacle that he has, 30% of the base that is staunchly in support of Donald Trump, it will be difficult to get past that if he does announce a presidential bid. And you see people like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is polling higher than he is at this stage in the game. However, if you recall, he does have some ties with the evangelical vote that's really important during the presidential primary in Iowa and other states like that, South Carolina, which he was just in last week. Also, some of the people that I've spoken to who are close to Pence say that, you know, one of the benefits of the January 6th hearing is that he's come out looking presidential. He was the one who called for reinforcements of the Capitol. He was the one who stood his ground that day and did not leave and finished his constitutional duty of certifying the vote on January 6, 2021.
Right, good point. In contrast to his boss, the president, who was, we now know, sitting in the dining room and not doing anything. You know, there was an unusual split-screen situation in Arizona this weekend when both President Trump and former Vice President Pence were both doing events in the state. And Mr. Trump really talked a lot about the January 6th committee. What did he say?
He went, when he was campaigning for Kari Lake, his gubernatorial candidate that he endorsed, and is in a tight race against Karen Taylor Robson there in the Grand Canyon State, Trump unleashed a verbal assault against the January 6th committee hearings that he's called the Kangaroo Court, a political witch hunt. He also went after witnesses who testified during those hearings, including Republican Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers, who fought against Trump's attempts to overturn the election. And he has felt the punitive backlash of that support, or for countering Trump and not giving in to Trump's demands. During this primary, during the event in Arizona, Trump went after Bowers, and he also propped up David Farnsworth, Bowers' opponent in that race. And it looks like at this stage that Bowers could lose, even though he's a traditional Republican, and solely because of he's now facing the ire of Trump and his supporters in Arizona.
Yet another case where President Trump appears to have put a personal grievance ahead of what might be in the best interest of his party. Before I let you go, Finn, I want to ask you about a disturbing moment at the Turning Point USA Student Action Summit in Tampa this weekend. This is a conservative conference, and here's how Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz mocked female abortion advocates. Take a listen.
Have you watched these pro-abortion, pro-murder rallies? The people are just disgusting. Like, why is it that the women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions? Nobody wants to impregnate you if you look like a thumb.
Finn, how are these disgusting comments being received? How were they received there at the event and more broadly within the Republican Party? Or is this something that at this point they have just come to expect from Matt Gaetz?
Gaetz has been sharply criticized because of those comments by both sides made in Tampa over the weekend. During the audience there did applaud to a degree, but he has been sharply and vociferously and emphatically criticized for his comments. Abortion rights advocates also have called his remarks misogynistic, and they also point out that Gaetz is still under federal investigation for relations with an underage girl. So there's still a lot of backlash to his comments made in Tampa.
Good point. Finn Gomez, thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nancy.